What's happening out there, people? Thanks for tuning into the Crash Bang Boom podcast. Got a killer drummer from a killer band in Chris Metcalf today, who plays in the Life and Times. Chris's ability to balance groove, chops, and overall dynamics were on full display when I caught up with them at St Vitus Bar during the tour for their most recent self-titled record. And it was one hell of a show, I gotta say that much. Damn! Chris is just a monster, and what a great band. But we get into sonic fingerprints, marching drums, gifted drums, the rich history of Kansas City, and talk about some of our favorite drummers from that area, as well as nerding out on our favorite 90s bands such as Barkmarket and Chavez. One note as well, after the interview I was talking to Chris about seeing Shiner apparently up to 50 times when he was growing up. So the drummers Jeff Brown, Tim Dow, and Jason Gerken were obviously big influences. We kind of didn't talk that much about that during the interview, so I figured I would throw that out there, as I am huge fans of them as well, but was never fortunate enough to have seen Shiner, and certainly not 50 times, which is incredible. Thanks to St Vitus Bar for helping to make so many of these interviews possible. So here we go. Chris Metcalf, The Life and Times. Crash, bang, boom!
Crowds go mad with joy. Give the
All right, Chris Metcalf, The Life and Times. Been out a week coming through Brooklyn. I'm catching up with you here. What's happening, man? How you doing?
Great. How are you?
Doing pretty good. It's a little cold outside. I'm not, as a Southerner, it's still something that I need to acclimate to. It's really, I think, to get my face frozen while riding a bike over a bridge.
Right, yeah. We're Kansas City and Chicago, so we know the deal.
I hear you.
Yeah, it still feels pretty nice.
Yeah.
And we've had real nice weather this whole time on tour, so.
Not having to drive through any major blizzards is probably a nice thing.
Yeah, not this time. Yeah, it's nice.
Right on. How have the shows been thus far?
Really good. Yeah, we're having a really good time. Been good crowds on all but one night, and I won't say where that was, but still good people to play to. Even if you're playing a smaller crowd and play a good show, it's still a good time, worthwhile.
Certainly better than playing a bad show in front of a lot of people.
Exactly. That's true.
So you got a few more shows, and then it's home. You looking forward to getting home, man? Do you get anxious, or you enjoy being out?
Not really, but it's always nice to get home. But sometimes it's a little. We could all be out for another couple weeks, as long as it's going smoothly and we're having a good time and playing well, which is luckily the case most of the time. So yeah, feels good to be out.
Speaking of which, home. Where is home? I know y'all are a St. Louis band. Oh no, Kansas City.
Yeah, we're from Kansas City as a band. I grew up around there and lived on the Kansas side, but ended up living in Kansas City, Missouri, for about 15 years, and then I've lived in Chicago for the last 3 years, and Alan and Eric have been up there for about 6 and 7 years. Yeah, so there's a little time in there where we were doing the somewhat long distance thing. It was a good experience and able to make it happen by planes, trains, and automobiles. And
exactly. Speaking of Kansas City, one of the things I wanted to ask you, man, some of my favorite drummers seem to come out of that area, or St. Louis, or any of that stuff, whether it's the Riddle of Steel drummers or the Shiner drummers, yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
And there seems to be a connection between all of you where you all play vintage Ludwig gear. Did y'all all...
I think that's really random, yeah.
Is it? Or did y'all all grow up fascination with Bonham, listen to classic rock radio or something?
Yeah, but I think us all having that stuff is a little bit random. Yeah, I think we all kind of just ended up acquiring that brand of gear kind of in a random way.
Yeah.
Half of my kit is the toms on my kit are late 70s Slingerland drums.
Oh, okay.
That I have a whole kit of that a friend of mine that I played music with for a long time, he bought that kit out of the paper out of classifieds, and maybe '96 he got it for maybe not even $200 and gave it to me.
Wow.
And
that's a hell of a gift.
Yeah, and the bass drum that I've used almost the whole time in Life and Times.
Both on recordings and live.
Right. Yeah, is a Ludwig marching bass drum that another friend of mine gave that to me.
Oh man, you're just
right. Yeah, gifted. Yeah.
You're getting all the gifts, man. It's like Christmas, drum Christmas.
Yeah. So that's random in that way, in those brands. But I definitely am a fan of the kind of older American heavyweight, those companies. They only made high-end instruments until very late 70s or about 80s. So kind of cool to have like equipment that was made, all that stuff made in Chicago. And when we were kids, I'm probably much older than you, but
probably not.
No,
I don't know. You're probably not. No, it's interesting too. In addition to y'all sharing like the Ludwig fascination, it seems y'all all have a really good, solid pocket that's even almost a little loose, and y'all all seem to have really good chops as well. So I
appreciate that. I think
it is an interesting thing that seems to come out. I don't know.
Yeah, and all those guys. I'm lucky that they're all. I can call all those guys friends of mine, and over time, some of them, I was already fans of theirs before. Say, Tim and Jason, who both played drums.
Tim Dow, Jason Gerken,
yeah,
Shiner.
That both played in Shiner, and it's nice to really kind of obsess over records like those guys played on, and to get to know them, and they're we're all I was gonna say normal people, but we're not we're all weirdos, but we have that, but all like great guys too, and on top of their the great drumming, I think we're all such big music fans too, so I think that's maybe subconscious to some people, some fans they're like, wow, drumming's so great, and they weren't really necessarily trying to like show off or rip, but they were just they did have that. They did have the chops. They had the ability to go off.
Right.
But for the most part, I think we all see ourselves as kind of just like big music fans, and I think we're all also good listeners too. You know, we're playing also. We can kind of go off and rip when it needs it, but playing for the song too, and all of us who have played with Alan, such a great songwriter, that he's another subconscious thing for the fans. They're like, why is this drum part so cool? Because we all thought of it together. Maybe Alan might have been like, hey, try this beat, something because he knows us so well, and we know each other and know how to play together, that has, in the writing process, like, we try to get each other out of our kind of natural, like, yeah, you could do that. And sometimes your first instinct and first thing you might come up to that works, and that's cool, and it stays that kind of initial idea, but you might go through. Life and Times, we have, several songs at this point where we exhausted the options, and like, hey, let's maybe slow it down or speed it up, or like some approach is suggested, something that I wouldn't have thought of, or at least that day or at that moment, like, wow, that's really strange, like, to play make something kind of backwards, or slow it down to a speed that feels a little uncomfortable at first, but then it ends up being the
right tempo for the song.
And maybe some other cool part or some fill comes out of that that just wouldn't have happened otherwise.
For one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned the bass drum that you're playing, and you said that's a marching bass drum. Is it a 24 by 14 or 26 by? Okay.
Yep.
So shallow depth, which I prefer as well.
Yep. Which is a real common size for
Ludwigs.
Early all those companies. Many
True, Slingerland.
Many decades. If they made a drum if they made a kick drum that was 24 inches, it'd be very rare that it would have been deeper or more shallow than that.
Right.
That's a real common size. And that's the thing. I think I did have kind of a newer Gretsch kit. This was 10 years ago or a little bit more, and yeah, I thought it was cool because of the 26. But
Right.
I'm kind of reminding myself right now I should maybe cut it. I should make it so it is shallow. But it was.
Right.
Being that big, it was too deep. It's like 18 or something.
Oh, that's crazy.
And
26 by 18.
And we started. I think we started recording. We started recording ourselves, and we were starting to record tracks for Tragic Boogie, our second full length album. And it just, especially that kick drum, it sounded cheap. It didn't sound as big as the marching
depth.
drum,
Right,
that I already had and already used on Suburban Hymns. So kind of went back to using that, and I was still using the 14-inch rack tom and 16 floor tom from that Gretsch kit, which they sounded okay. They were all right, and you can kind of get away with that. But even getting those Slingerland drums back out, and then starting to record on those for No One Loves You Like I Do, the next full length. There's better instruments. They're way higher quality than this kind of cheaper Gretsch kit at the time.
Interesting. Well, it's important to I think note that Life and Times, the recordings, they've done a great job of capturing the natural sound of that bass drum, which is then also you can witness live as well. So it's a live bass drum sound, so, and it's there across the board, which is great that you can capture that and then replicate it live, which is kind of rare, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think that is, it's not only us, but we are all interested in that kind of thing, and bands that we like. You see them live, and you can tell that it's by the sound of it. It's like, oh, that's the same.
Yes.
That's almost all the same gear they use on that record, or maybe all their records.
That goes back to the Bonham thing as well. You know? I mean,
definitely.
Bonham sounded like Bonham live and in the studio.
Yeah, and I loved that about some of my favorite bands that I've gotten to see, and seeing U2 or Rush or something, and like Neil would always change. He'd change his drum kits over the years, but like even just seeing some of those same guitars, it's like, wow, they've had that since they were kids, and that's probably on like several records that you just listen to over and over and over. And
Growing up, what were you listening to around the time you started playing drums? And was your first drum set, was that the stuff that was gifted to you? Has that been your first drum set from the get-go, or did you have drums prior to that?
Actually, the first drum set I did have at home, I was maybe 12 years old, was I just borrowed it for a little bit of a friend of my dad's that he worked with, and I wish I still had that kit or had bought it at the time.
Really?
Eventually, but we ended up giving it back, and I at that time, maybe 12 or 13 years old, I mowed enough lawns to buy a cheap. I bought a real cheap Remo kit, which is strange. People are like, Remo made drums? Like, yeah, they terrible. But I also wish I still had that kit. That was the first kit that I bought. And I was.
Do you remember PV made drums, and they were those crazy tubular? What the fuck was the deal with those?
Yeah, strange.
That was the
strange
stupidest.
Hoops on them that were like there was like no metal. Hoops. Really strange.
Super weird.
Yeah.
Well, who were you listening to once you started playing that you were maybe emulating or getting inspired by?
Yeah, I was definitely lucky to have my family. None of them played music, but they're all big music fans.
So music was in the house.
Yeah, definitely, and in the car, and my parents had a cool record collection, and even as a kid, some of it was like a little bit before my time, but I was still like, well, that's cool that my parents they've got some Beatles and Elton John and Carly Simon or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, big music fans, and definitely both of my older brothers, and especially our oldest brother just had a massive record collection, and both kind of test me. I'd come into one of their rooms and like, Chris, who is this? And like, this is Rat, or this is
Right.
Led Zeppelin, or Pink Floyd, or Rush, or second or third grade when I was old enough to buy my own records. I was getting the whole Rush collection and
Yeah.
all the Police records and
Yeah.
Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and was definitely into some of my brothers' like metal stuff, you know. I
Right.
loved Iron Maiden, and a few years later Metallica and Slayer and Anthrax and
Oh, yeah.
Sepultura a little bit
Oh,
later.
yeah.
I was gonna say we started smoking pot, and I don't know if we did. I don't know if we did, or if we something happened. I'll just say that went from really extreme metal at that time to
Right.
like Pink Floyd and
I'm going to say the weed might have had something to do with it.
I don't know. We had heard of acid or something, but even bands by the time we were in high school, you know, there was a new kind of rock and roll coming out that was like had kind of a mix of that. There was some kind of in between metal and Pink Floyd, which might have been like Smashing Pumpkins for us
Sure.
right when they came out. Those kind of things were revelation, you know, or
Sure.
a life changer first, and getting into those bands and being able to see them kind of before they became these iconic bands, you know,
Right.
that, or a Tool, you know, being able
Yeah.
to see bands like that in Lawrence, Kansas, you know, when the crowd's like 800 people.
Yeah.
And the people knew that it was special at that time. We all knew it was like, this is a different kind of thing. And
In regards to like Tool, you saw
yeah,
Tool.
yeah, and Smashing Pumpkins
Sure.
and Helmet and
Fuck
Quicksand
yeah.
and
Yeah.
like all these bands, and for kind of our generation that we never got to see, like say Barkmarket or
Right.
Chavez
I
or
never got to
something
see
that
those
are
bands
just
either.
like
Yeah.
they're just like in our like holy grail of, of a handful of records too.
Sure.
You know, it's a different thing, you know, and not to discredit it, but it's a different thing when like couple Barkmarket records, couple Chavez records, couple Quicksand records.
Elron for me for Barkmarket is like holy shit.
Yeah, I
The
think
production I love as well.
Well, I was gonna say that, and I like the songs, but yeah, it's the production I think on that. But I got into Gimmick, and I think that would be
Gimmick is crazy.
I think that would be the one. I remember getting that on tape, and I think somebody played it for me, and they're like, "You want to hear the heaviest fucking band you'll ever hear?" It's like, yeah, of course, you know.
Yeah, of course.
And I think they might have played Lard Room for me, and I was like, "You're right. Yeah, this is heavy as fuck, and
Yes.
this is so cool." It kind of unfolded on me, like after I kind of forced myself to listen to it, and it's one of those things, like a Chavez, or I think some of my favorite records. You know, you hear it and you know that you like it, but you kind of like have to like.
You have to digest it a little bit.
Yeah,
for sure.
or you're like, get it like, oh, I like that song, and then on side 2, I like that one,
Sure.
and then after a while, you
realize you like
kind
that
of
thing.
let it go, and you listen to it enough, and it does unfold. And same with the Smashing Pumpkins, when
Right.
that Gish, and that's one. I think the three of us all agree on, you know, like,
Really?
and
Smashing
we're
Pumpkins in particular?
Yeah, and that record, and a lot of Siamese Dream. The three of us have a deep pool of
Sure.
like records and bands, but we all have things that individually that are like the other guy, you know, we're like, oh, that's okay, you know.
Sure, of course.
But we respect each other's taste, you know, or there might be a couple of us that spent time with some record or band, and the other just didn't know about it,
Uh-huh.
or I didn't know about, say, Jesus Lizard at the time, you know.
I
but
was about
like
to mention Jesus Lizard, yeah.
something that I know that looking back on it, had I known about it, I would have been way into it. But there might have been 2 or 3 other bands at that same time that were doing something so similar that I was into.
It's like you vicariously got a sense of it because all those bands were inspiring each other. So
Sure,
if you weren't
sure.
into them directly, you were still getting some of that.
Yeah. I liked that, getting into those bands like Smashing Pumpkins. We were in Kansas City, but Smashing Pumpkins represented Chicago to us and to many of my friends. Or Barkmarket and Helmet and Quicksand. That was New York. It was like this East Coast, super heavy, but just a different kind of rock. You know, it was like this satisfies our kind of like metal like shit that we grew up
intensity.
on, but it's like also different. It was
Angular
a different,
and noisy and
different
more
kind of
punk rock.
Yeah. and kind of like melodic too, more than, and certainly Smashing Pumpkins. It was that like they're as rockin' as it gets, but it was also this like Pink Floyd kind of trippiness, you know, super psychedelic, and Tool for being a real super heavy and fucking aggressive and like metal. Still very psychedelic.
Yes,
like we all picked
and
up
increasingly
on that.
So as that band has put out more records, more proggy and psyche, and
definitely
weirder and weirder.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I'll tell you a story about the Jesus Lizard. The first time I had heard of them, I think I was reading a magazine or something. You know, that's back in the good old days when you used to figure out what bands were doing what, when you would read magazines about it.
Yeah.
And I saw a few people mention the Jesus Lizard, so I found a used cassette tape, and it was Liar. And I listened to it, and I remember thinking, this is really fucking weird. Same thing we're talking about. This is going to take a while for me to figure out. And
you know that you like it, but you're like...
It was so off. I mean, the Jesus Lizard is such an acquired taste, really, as well. But it was funny because obviously someone got it and was like, I don't like this. Or maybe they dubbed it and then sold it or did whatever they did. But I'm pretty sure somebody got it, was like, fuck this, I'm getting rid of it. Yeah. And then I got it, and I was I was borderline like, yeah, fuck this, I'm getting rid of it. And then once I got it, then that is kind of the band that tied together so many 90s bands, so many of what we're talking about, from Barkmarket, Quicksand. You know, Quicksand was really the first for me. I was into Fugazi at the time, and then I remember when that first video came out off of Slip, and I saw it, maybe they played it on MTV or something, and I was like, it reminded me a little bit of Fugazi.
And which I wouldn't have put together so much until way after I was into that band. And I did know about Fugazi, but for whatever reason, I just didn't have to like rush out and get a Fugazi record.
Right.
I loved it, but I just like, and I always try to explain that about Barkmarket. I think to people, a lot of people like missed that band and never knew about it. And now 25 or closer to 30 years later, you try to explain Barkmarket, and it's like, even to people that do know about those other like 90s like kind of heavy New York bands, it's like, you know what, like I think Barkmarket, I think that's who all those guys were like bowing down to. But also Chavez too is a band that is another one that was just like out of nowhere. You know, definitely pre-internet, and record stores actually still existed, and it was a word of mouth at that time, and through friends, like, hey, check this record out, and it was like another one that was like I knew right away, and listened to a friend in a friend's car that like we were listening to Ride the Fader. That was my introduction. I was like, this is kick ass, but it's so weird. I didn't at that time didn't understand the production maybe or something. It was like, this is rocking in it, but it's raw and it's really weird. But another one that just quickly unfolded into like, this may be one of the best rock and roll albums like ever. Yeah, it's badass. Well, I mean, one of the interesting things as well, going back to, I guess, the time capsule that is YouTube and the internet, you don't need to look much farther than seeing how many bands have done reunions, because people have gained knowledge about bands that might have been otherwise obscure, like you're saying. Definitely. So, I mean, if you take the internet away, most of these reunions wouldn't be happening. Oh, for sure. Because I didn't get to see Quicksand back in the day. I didn't get to see Chavez back in the day. I didn't get to see Shiner back in the day. I got to see all three of those bands. Yeah, it is a trip. But even, again, with the internet, there's almost too much. So it's like, in a weird way, it's almost harder to find something that you have really to sift through so much shit to find the gems. To really maybe 10 or 20 times harder than being in a cool record store 20, 25, 30 years ago. Having that tangible experience associated with it was definitely a different thing. Than it is now. Although then again, everything is so cyclical. People are printing cassette tapes. People are printing vinyl. You know. So it is. It's you know, it's coming back around. But there still are people like they're still surprised, like, oh, vinyl's back. You guys actually have records. Like, it's not just us. Like, and it's not just coming back. No, you know? It's not. And even CDs seem like people are kind of surprised about that. It's like, so you still have CDs? It's like people want it, right? And I want it. Technology is pros and cons. It's like people are used to hearing stuff on little earbuds and just listening to stuff on their shitty phone speaker and MP3. It doesn't, CD quality is still like badass. And that's another thing about vinyl that people are still kind of like surprised about. It's like, man, this vinyl record sounds so great. It's like, well, yeah,
Goddamn right it
because
does.
you've just got too used to like listening to something
MP3s.
at such a lower quality,
Right.
you know. But
Well-
what about drums? Like, what? Yeah. What about,
No, let's talk more about the '90s and cassettes and and vinyl. One last question for you, man. New record, self-titled. What was the experience in recording that? Do you feel that there's a continuum with your records? I feel like sonically that there certainly is.
Yeah, really great time recording it. I mean, we love like all the aspects of what we do. You know, writing,
That's
and
a good thing.
recording, and mixing, and getting something done, and then going and touring on it. Even to like people that we know that like we're always at a point where like we're about ready to finish a record, and when we put it out, it's like trying to explain to even the closest friends. They're like, "This is the best thing we've ever done."
Yeah.
But we always, I think, genuinely feel like that way.
Which is, once again, a very good thing as well.
And so, you know, we've done so much as a band, but we really felt like that. You know, it's really, really amazing feeling. And then to go play it live, you know. We did the record in its entirety, and it makes a great live set, you know.
Right.
Oh, it turns out that the great sequence for a record, but like play a show, and it's like, wow, it's got a cool, really great flow to it. The songs and the parts and the recording is very detailed, and part of the satisfaction of for us the recording, and it's like that's our gear, you know. That's
exactly.
like that's and everything's deliberate, you know. We're into like getting super detailed, you know, and sometimes without even really trying too hard, you know. Again, it could sound a little cliche, but some things are just magic, you know.
Yep.
Like where these very detailed things and layered things are just kind of happen.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's a result of just like knowing each other so well, and we still always want to do something a little bit different. And I think it's a good feeling. All of our records are a little bit different, but at the same time, it's still a Life and Times. But,
Definitely.
But there is this continuity where certain sounds of our gear that happens to also be the same gear.
Yeah.
We get into our favorite bands and favorite musicians for the same reason in their records, that it's like, yeah, they did a little something different here, but it's like still like unmistakably them, you know.
Right.
It's a like a fingerprint, you know, ear print. I don't know how.
An audible fingerprint.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thanks for talking to me, man.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much,
Absolutely.
Jody.
Thanks, Chris and the Life and Times dudes, for putting on one hell of a show. Pick up their new record everywhere record CDs, tapes, and/or MP3s are sold. You won't regret it. They got one hell of a catalog up to this point. So thanks again, Chris. Life and Times. We out. Crash, bang, boom.